Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something really fascinating, a sober systems-level look at the actual underlying mechanics of modern democratic institutions and the military-industrial complex. We're going to step right past the sensationalism and instead focus on how power, incentives, and institutional momentum literally operate right in plain sight. This isn't about shadowy figures and smoke-filled rooms, it's about looking at the anatomy of a structural ecosystem. So let's jump right in with a pretty jarring reality. The quote you're seeing here, this isn't some leaked secret. It's straight from a public quarterly earnings call by executives at General Dynamics. And they stated this totally openly, simply because the market rewards it. We aren't uncovering some dark conspiracy here. We're just observing a highly organized, completely legal, and self-preserving machine doing its job. To really break down how this machine works, here's our roadmap for today. 1. Commercial simulation of democracy. 2. 4 layers of capture. 3. The business of perpetual threat. 4. Laboratories of autonomous violence. 5. The colonial return home. And 6. Proximity to catastrophe.
All right, let's get into Section 1, Commercial Simulation of Democracy.
Now, let's be absolutely clear right out of the gate. We are not saying that democracy is fake. Not at all. Elections happen, committees still meet. But according to the sources we're looking at, we're operating within what's called a commercial simulation of democracy. Basically, it's a system where the incentives churning beneath the surface reliably reward capital-driven outcomes long before the public even enters the conversation. Just take a look at this contrast. It's really striking. On the left side, you've got the democratic form, the votes, the hearings, the reports. It looks exactly like democracy, right? But then on the right, you see the oligarchic reality. When political participation requires massive amounts of capital, outcomes are effectively just purchased. It creates a literal market for influence rather than relying on informed public consent. Which brings us to Section 2, 4 layers of capture. So how does this capture actually happen in practice? Well, the industry uses 4 concurrent methods to systematically route outcomes in its favor. We're talking about direct campaign finance, the revolving door, think tanks, and geographic capture. Let's actually look at the data here. Look at this documented purchasing pattern compiled by researcher Stephen Semler. It's wild. Lawmakers who vote yes on military budget increases receive 4 to 6 times more in arms industry donations than those who vote no. And this happens consistently, year after year, across budget cycles. It's not even necessarily a direct bribe. It's more like a structural purchasing arrangement. The product being bought? A simple yes vote. Let's see how those other layers work in action. First up, the revolving door. In one example, a former senator leverages his vote on a treaty to demand a $1.7 trillion nuclear upgrade, and then literally leaves office to go lobby for the exact company building those upgrades. Next, think tanks. We see the Atlantic Council recommending new ICBMs while quietly being funded by the sole contractor that makes them. And finally, geography. Congress funds 3 combat ships with known structural flaws entirely just to preserve local jobs in specific districts. So, the intellectual and geographic infrastructure of our democracy is essentially quietly colonized by financial interests. Moving on to Section 3, the business of perpetual threat. The absolutely crucial point to understand here revolves around this exact phrase, great power competition. It is honestly the perfect political product. Why? Well, solvable threats eventually end procurement cycles, right? So, to maintain indefinite spending, the system literally requires an undefined enemy. It needs a permanent, unresolvable horizon of danger. There's zero metric of sufficiency, which means there is no point where anyone can stand up and say, okay, we've spent enough. And here's how that perpetual threat logic plays out in the real world, with some pretty terrifying consequences on the tactical nuclear escalation ladder. Defense-funded think tanks start advocating for smaller, tactical nukes. Then policy gets written to actually build them. But because they are smaller, the threshold for actually using a nuclear weapon drops significantly. Obviously, adversaries see this happening and develop their own, kicking off a brand new arms race. And the companies? They profit at every single rung of this ladder, inadvertently shortening the distance to an all-out war. Okay, let's shift gears to Section 4, Laboratories of Autonomous Violence. Consider the AI targeting pipeline that's been recently utilized in Gaza, functioning almost like a real-world testing ground. You've got Gospel, which targets infrastructure. Then there's Lavender, used for algorithmically identifying individuals. But maybe the most chilling is a program called Where's Daddy, which alerts operators to strike precisely when targets are home with their families.
And crucially, commercial tech giants, companies we use every day like Google and Amazon, are deeply integrated into this, providing the cloud infrastructure for these classified autonomous pipelines.
Now take a look at this number, 20 seconds. That is the reported amount of human approval time given to authorize an AI-generated strike. I mean, sure, it technically keeps a human in the loop for legal cover, but functionally, it completely dissolves meaningful moral agency. Atrocity is essentially reduced to a swift, frictionless bureaucratic workflow.
Which really leads us to a critical realization, and it completely counters all that sensationalist Hollywood discourse you hear about AI. We don't actually need to fear machines waking up and deciding to wipe us out. The immediate danger is way more grounded than that. Humans are using machines right now to kill more efficiently, at a massive scale, and with the moral responsibility so heavily diffused through these systems that literally nobody has to answer for it.
Let's look at how this impacts us locally in Section 5, the colonial return home.
You can actually trace the life cycle of domestic militarization through a very clear step-by-step pipeline. First, unlimited military spending generates massive weapons surpluses. Next, through initiatives like the Pentagon's 1033 program, this surplus hardware is distributed to local domestic police forces for absolutely zero cost. And finally, because of use-it-or-lose-it rules, those local police forces have a massive structural incentive to deploy this military-grade hardware right in civilian settings. The Pentagon essentially acts as a giant bureaucratic overflow mechanism for the arms industry. And this cycle directly impacts everyday domestic civilian life. When citizens protest, whether that's happening in Bangladesh, Paris, or even your own city, these demonstrations functionally become live global showrooms. They serve as literal marketing exercises for crowd control tech. It gets field tested on domestic populations and then packaged up and sold globally.
And that brings us to our final section. Section 6, Proximity to Catastrophe. This isn't just a problem for voters, by the way. It completely overwhelms leadership as well. During his final year in office, President Obama reportedly admitted in private that there is a deep bias toward war in Washington. And that's incredibly revealing, right? It shows that even the highest elected officials in the world experience the system not as something they actively command, but as this emergent, self-preserving machine that they just can't rein in. When you pull back from all of this, you start to see the deepest structural pattern at play, what's often referred to as the tragic arc of technological civilization. Think about it. Every single advance, from nuclear deterrence to AI targeting to militarized policing, always emerges justified as protection. But inevitably, it expands institutional power, it drastically lowers the barriers to using force, and it becomes so deeply economically embedded that reversing it becomes almost impossible. Security and coercion rise together, hand in hand. Just read this profound excerpt from a letter to the editor. It so perfectly contrasts the illusion of absolute security with our actual daily reality. We've totally normalized a state where our civilization's survival rests on automated readiness and split-second decisions. So we have to ask, is this actually security, or have we just engineered a highly managed permanent proximity to catastrophe? Which leaves us with this final, really tragic ambiguity to consider. We are technologically superhuman, but perhaps psychologically prehistoric. As these automated, profit-driven systems of power scale up globally, we really have to ask ourselves, have systems of power evolved faster than our democratic ability to correct them? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I truly hope it gave you a powerful new lens to look at the systems operating all around us.